Right?
Oh, did you?
Yeah. You can't really talk about top tech and use the lapel microphone the wrong way.
That's right, exactly. Kind of just like, no, you just not all your credibility. Rise up. I don't know. Do you all have one? Sorry, is it one? Yeah. Okay, let's do this thing.
Yes.
Here we go. Is this on? No. Are we sure it's on? Hey, there we go.
Is it on?
It is. Yeah. Can everyone hear me in the back? Everyone hear me in the back? Okay, it's 1 or maybe even 1:01 by now, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Cindy Bleiberg, and I am this year's president of LITA. And I want to thank everybody for coming to Sunday Afternoon with LITA, which we are kicking off with Top Tech Trends. And as you can see on the screen, is going to be followed by our President's Program with Kimberly Bryant of Black Girls Code, which is going to be awesome. Just really quickly, I just wanted to recognize the Top Tech Trends Committee, without whom any of this would have been possible. So please stand up, guys. Stand up and wave. Top Tech Trends Committee, as well as our moderator, Natalie. Hey. Thank you. This is all brought to you by them and the letter M. So, also, I want to thank and recognize the members of the LITA board. If you're here, stand up, turn around, wave, etc. Thanks. Thanks. And also LITA staff. I think we have a couple of the LITA staff in the room who do a fantastic job of always, yes, there they are in the back, of supporting us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Natalie Templeman-Cluett, who is also our chair of Top Tech Trends. Take it away, Natalie.
Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. If you no? Okay. I'm glad you told me. Can you hear me better now? Okay. I'll try and speak right into the mic. A few little things. If you may have noticed that the wireless for ALA is not robust, for lack of a better word. You can use its LVCC, and then the only thing is you need to open a new browser window and wait a minute, and then you'll get prompted to have, I think it's a day of free wireless. Okay, so that means that you can tweet throughout the session, and if you'd like to tweet throughout the session, I'm just going to move back a slide or two, and in theory, perhaps not in practice. Hold on with me. Okay, this is the hashtag. It's ALATTT. It'll be on the slides throughout the session in case you forget. And the next slide just gives a list of panelists. They don't all fit on one slide, so I'll be toggling back and forth between slides. And it has their trends and Twitter handles. The panelists' names are across the front. It may be hard to see, but I'll be introducing them briefly at the beginning. And I'll be introducing them alphabetically. However, they're not talking about trends alphabetically. So a few other minor things before we get started. What we're going to do today, since we have 90 minutes, which is rare, we usually have 60, is have 2 panelists or trendsters, followed by some questions, followed by 2 more questions, 3 more, the rest of the questions. So as the second panelist through is winding up and I'll mention something, you should feel free to go up to the mics and ask a few questions. We won't have a ton of time, but I'll just make sure that we're running smoothly. You can also tweet questions, and Emily, who is sitting right there, is going to sort of moderate the questions. The other thing she's going to do is give away a bottle of wine, which I bought the first night of being here and realized it was very redundant. And so she's going to give away this bottle of wine to what she rates as the top tweet. So you might want to all suck up to Emily right now. So
yeah, work hard.
That being said, it's only $8 wine. So. So I think that's everything. Any luck with wireless with the LVCC? Okay, great. So very quickly, the panelists are, I'm doing this alphabetically again, not that they're sitting that way, but it's Boyoung Kim, who's the Associate Director for Library Applications and Knowledge Systems at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, Health Sciences and Human Services Library. We've got, and you can wave since you're, well. We've got David Lee King, Digital Services Director at Topeka and Shawnee County Public Library. Jason Griffey, founder and principal consultant at Evanly Distributed LLC. Ken Varnum, Web Systems Manager at the University of Michigan Libraries. Mita Williams, User Experience Librarian at the LITA Library at the University of Windsor in Ontario, Canada. Ranti Junis, Systems Librarian for Electronic Resources at Michigan State. And Roger, Program Director at Ithaca SNR. Okay, so we're going to start with Ken. So Ken's going to talk about his trend for a little while, followed by Mita, followed by questions.
Lavalier mic here. So is this actually working out there? No. This is a top technology. All right. This better? No.
As if you get close to it.
Better? All right. Wow. This feels very old school Vegas, the huge mic at the boxing ring. So what I want to talk about today is a trend I've seen in discovery systems. Discovery is the hot, sexy new thing right now. Everything is discovery this, discovery that. And I want to put it in a little bit of context to remind us of where we've been, where we're going in discovery. And so, not that long ago, the hot new thing was federated search. We all loved it because, well, actually, we didn't love it at all, but it was there. And you can think of it, there were thousands of ponds of information out there, and you could dip your toes into one or the other. And federated search for the first time let us actually dip into 2 or 3 ponds at a time, or maybe 4 ponds if you were really lucky. And you still had all that work of finding the right pond to look in and making sure you didn't have anything adjacent. That technique was great. Now we've got these giant oceans of information. All the ponds have been sucked into one giant basin, mixed up, and get spat back out at you in some way or another. And that right now is pretty cool because all of a sudden you got everything for some values of everything. And we've all of a sudden gone from having research from the user perspective be hard, challenging, not easy to sort out, to a place where all of a sudden everybody thinks it's really, really easy because everything they think is in one place. The challenges there is that users, because all these discovery systems look the same from the naive user perspective, and I think a lot of our users probably fall into that category, they all feel the same, they all look the same, and they don't see a difference between using your wonderful special resource library discovery system or Google or whatever they happen to find that day when they're poking around the internet. It's very hard to discern where the edges of these oceans are. The bottoms are deep and unfathomable. You just can't figure out the scope of what you might be doing. And to extend this tortured metaphor a little bit more, it's fairly stormy out there. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's all sorts of things going on in terms of which content is where, and how we as librarians or users can understand what it is they're actually searching when they even know they're searching everything. So that's kind of the progression. We've gone from searching one or more ponds to searching everything. And I think where we're going is getting back to this idea of streams of information, flows that work well for your particular context. I see that libraries are starting to think about ways, and vendors are starting to provide ways to do more focused subsets of these giant oceans. And the vendor solutions that I've seen are very, very broad, and they're smaller than oceans, bigger than ponds, but they're still not great. What I think is going to be happening is that discovery systems will become much more locally tunable, that the interfaces that we use to say who can search what, how to find things in these discovery oceans will be much more tunable and focused, so that we as librarians will be able to twiddle all sorts of knobs and say, I want the stream that's right for undergraduate students in, say, psychology, and a different one for undergraduate students someplace else, or for well-experienced, knowledgeable researchers in another area. So that you end up searching the giant ocean but have it filtered intelligently and in a locally kind of for your users, not just the giant buckets. So I see what I think is happening here is that with a little bit of work on the librarian side, we'll be able to say, pool the resources and actually focus what people can search on very specific subsets of the giant ocean. This would, of course, be an optional kind of thing. You could do the giant search and say, well, I want to see the resources that are great for me in my context of being an undergraduate student in geology, or an undergraduate student in psychology, perhaps, or a PhD researcher in economics. So just imagine if you could do that and you search for depression, and in each of those three contexts. Now you get a mix of everything through some mysterious ranking algorithm, and the things in your field may or may not be first. And we know that users don't understand facets, they don't do scope narrowing, they're not good at that. So you could do that same search, and with some work on the librarian side to kind of categorize and assign resources both in the subject area and in the level and appropriateness for the way you do things in your campus, you could get very different sets of results that were narrowly focused in that particular area. So I think this opens up all sorts of possibilities in terms of delivering information more accurately, more specifically to users, the opportunity to be more proactive in getting things to users directly before they know they need it, or just as a stream of what's new in your profession at your level. And again, this kind of, back to the streams. I remember 20 years ago or thereabouts, there was selective dissemination of information, which countered the Reagan era SDI acronym really in an odd way. And this is that was poorly done, or because technology wasn't there, and I think now we're able to really reach that level, and we'll see these systems evolving and tailored to local user needs much fairly soon. Thanks.
All right. So hello, my name is Mita Williams, and you may not already know this, but my tech trend is already well in use. It's being used by thousands of families around the world. And in fact, since March of 2014 in the United States, people have been taking advantage of my top tech trend, which is one-click server installs. You see, because in March, the company Mojang made available what's known as Minecraft Realms. So now families, for the price of $13 a year, can install their own private Minecraft server for up to 20 people. And essentially, it's a safe way where kids can play and collaborate and build together on using Minecraft. And that's, now the thing is that Mojang actually made Minecraft readily available and installed on servers, so you could have large and public servers on the internet for many years now. But it was really restricted to people who knew how to install a server. And what Mojang has made available is that it's made it much more simpler for, as I said, a family to put their own server up where it's maybe safe for their 8-year-olds. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited about this particular software, is that I think it's going to really lower the barriers of participation for all sorts of new software, not just for individuals, but for libraries. So I'll give you another example of, say, one-click server install software. The Graduate Center at CUNY, they're working on something called DH in a Box. DH stands for Digital Humanities, and they're working on creating a single server or a box of all sorts of well-established digital humanities tools. These include Omeka for presenting digital objects, for IPython Notebook for sharing programming in the sort of Python environment, for sharing R and the Natural Language Toolkit and Mallet. So if you wanted to try all this sort of software out, you don't have to learn how to install all that software. They're providing a service just to make it really easy for scholars and future scholars and potential scholars and people who want to serve scholars to just get their hands dirty and sort of try the software itself. And I think it's a really, really great project. Now, I'm not exactly sure what software they're using behind the scenes. It's likely they're using probably one of the sort of the big three in this sort of space. They include Chef, Puppet, and Docker. And what this software does is it makes it really easy to set up a server. And if you've never set up a server, it's actually a fairly tedious process. First, you have to get a computer, then you have to install the software that runs the server, then you have to install the languages that all the other software is going to run on it, then you have to add modules, then you have to add dependencies, and then you have to configure them, and then you have to make sure they all talk to each other, and you have to make sure they're all up to date and run security updates. And it can be a long process. And what the software like Chef and Puppet does is it remembers all those little steps so that if you want to make another server, you just press a button and it says, I would like another one of those servers, and it will essentially run those steps for you. And so it's a good way to kind of think about them as server recipes. And already on Twitter, for example, I've seen people say, hey, you should check out this guy's recipe for running a data scientist box. All this, the instructions are readily available on GitHub. And even if you don't have a computer that's like sitting under your desk where you could install this software, there are services such as Amazon's Web Services where you can essentially run that software on those servers. If you're interested, you can actually look at the AWS, or Amazon Web Services Marketplace. And right now you can one-click server install a server, for example, if you were interested in trying ThinkUp, or if you were interested in trying Ruby on Rails. So you don't have to learn about how to install a programming language before you can actually play around with it. Now, if you don't want to use Amazon, one of the things that's interesting, I think, is that about a month or so ago, Google announced that they are heavily going to make use of Docker, which is one of these services, for their own cloud services, for their app scripting and for their Google services. How that actually works, to be honest, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not sure how that's going to work out, but one of the things I do know is that there's a couple other projects I think that will be very relevant for libraries. The one in particular is the Digital Public Library of America. They've recently applied for E-rate funding from the FCC. So the E-rate funding is used by libraries and schools to help provide internet access to people, to their communities. And the FCC is now looking for new ways to use that sort of money from the FCC and expand participation in sort of the internet space. And the Digital Public Library of America is looking into essentially helping public libraries have the ability to run their software, presumably using sort of this one-click software where they host it, so everyone can get more involved in digitizing information and making it more readily available. So those are the reasons why I'm really excited about this technology. I'm also really excited to hear about how this might affect other trends, and I think that's it.
Great. Thanks, Mita. So why don't we just open it up to the panel, and while we're doing so, with some feedback or other thoughts on this. While we're doing so, if you guys have any questions, you're welcome to just wander up to the mic or tweet with the hashtag, and we will field them. So any thoughts from the panelists? Is anyone using one-click install server software? Anyone pondered it? Ranti?
Actually, I'm interested in your on that part. It seems like then we've become a little countries of Minecraft.
Okay.
Right up next to it.
Hello.
Maybe you have to face the audience, which is kind of
Okay.
weird, given that you're talking to me.
Yeah. What I'm interested is actually it's like your Minecraft one installed. It's then every family or every organization can have their own Minecraft countries. And it just come back to me, well, what if then we have delegation for each country and visit the other country? So it's become another connections between one country to another. It's just fascinating to me because that's yet another way of connecting with other communities, not just within your own bubble, so to speak.
And that's one of the things, Minecraft is really, there's some people who've been
Yes.
looking at Minecraft, in the education setting. And again, it was really limited to people who had a lot of that sort of ability to set up servers. And so I like the idea of, Minecraft Nation. There's a question.
Question?
This is for Ken.
I think you might need to speak up. Sorry, the mics don't seem to be.
Okay.
But you might.
This is for Ken. In your vision, are you still imagining librarians playing a
I'll repeat.
Sorry?
Sorry, I was just telling these guys at the back that I'll repeat it.
Okay. Are you envisioning librarians playing a key role here? Because I don't. I see librarians being disintermediated and users wanting this, and I'm trying to figure out your vision of how it would actually work. So maybe you could explain it a bit.
So the question is about discovery systems and whether or not I see librarians having an active role in the maintenance of a customized system as I described. Is that fair? And yes, I clearly do. I think that what we see from the vendor space so far has been very, very broad, meat cleaver chunks of information that get sliced off by broad subject areas, and that miss a lot of the fine points. And I think that all of us there's a lot of commonality. Psychology is psychology across most institutions for an introductory level, maybe for an advanced level. Some places specialize in one area or the other more. So there are distinctions. But I think that what we do have different is different suites of resources and different kinds of things that we as a library feel important to provide to our campus more directly or more handily. This may be for financial reasons. We really want to boost the use out of database X because it costs a bundle, and if we can't justify use, it's gone. It may be because this set of resources, whether this specific journal or suite of journals, is very important to our faculty and the way that they teach a subject. We want to be able to do that. So I see the librarians needing to configure and tweak and do a lot of locally focused tailoring of the streams. But it means that we have to get the vendors to listen to that and provide configuration systems that are more than we have biology, we don't have biology.
But you're assuming people are still coming to the library website. Is that right? You're starting their discovery at the library?
I think that I don't think that users start the discovery at the library all the time. The question was, do users still come to the library? And I don't think that they always do. I clearly think they should. I think that we need to build systems that make it obvious that they ought to be, and by providing better values added on to merely searching, but in terms of the content flows that we can then direct to them throughout the course of a semester, for example.
I think we've got time for one more. Oh, now we have sound. Maybe we'll have some there too. Yeah.
Hi. Hello. Hi. I have a question for Mita, and that is about platform as a service. Did you consider that like as a way, like Heroku is huge in that?
Don't go away. I'm not. You know what? I'm not as well versed as Heroku as a service. Could you give me an example of how you think that this might work?
Well, I think that we do a lot of development, and certainly we're an Amazon partner too, so we use Amazon all the time. We move our data centers with, but platform as a service lets you spin up specific service. Like Heroku famously does Ruby. They do other things. Google, Docker, you can do that too. But that lets you go, spinning up images on Amazon is a much more involved process than setting up a server, which is instant on Heroku.
Okay.
And it's just, it's a really easy way to get going and usually free in the first step too.
Okay, so I think with Heroku, I think when I hear people talk about Heroku, it's usually at the developer level, and I think if Heroku can put a layer on so it gets to the people who make websites, and then we get to the point where it's people who use websites, I think we'd see a lot more take up of it.
It can scale to anything.
Yeah.
Originally, it was sort of limited, but it can really scale. I know it's some pretty large operations from that.
Well, thank you. That's great to know.
And Salesforce owns it, I think, now.
Oh.
That speaks volumes. I think it's time for David to talk a little about his trend.
All right.
And maybe, David, you should start by seeing if everyone can hear you at the back, because the mic seems...
Okay. Can everybody hear me in the back?
Yay!
Yay. My top tech trend should be talking into the microphone, right?
Yeah.
Got to eat it. So I'm talking about a mobile-first philosophy, but let's just talk about mobile in general first. So I talk about this once in a while, and these numbers always get bigger. So right now, globally, 1 in 5 people in the whole wide world own a smartphone. 1 in 5. That's pretty big. That's a lot of people. 1 in 17 own a tablet. And then just looking at some American stats, 91% of people sleep within arm's reach of their mobile device. How many of you cussed at your mobile device this morning when it beeped at you and told you to get up? It's the favorite consumption platform. It's mobile devices have recently surpassed newspapers and magazines as far as what you go to, and usually that's probably in front of the TV also. 99% of us use our devices every day. Not sure what the other 1% are doing. Maybe they lost theirs. And then just taking it back to at least my library, mobile usage on our library's website. Right now it's 32% of visits to my library's website are through either a smartphone or a tablet. 32%. In town, one of our local news stations, that same percent is 75%. That's huge, right? So that's why I want to focus on a mobile first philosophy. What is that? Basically, it's when you're building a new, well, first we'll talk about websites. When you're building a website, make sure it works on the mobile device first. Getting an app with locations and hours, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your whole website, all your content, easily accessible on a smartphone, on a tablet, on the desktop. Some of you might have heard of responsive design. That's one way to do it. There's many ways to do it, but just make sure all your content is on your website, whether that website is on the mobile device or on a bigger experience. I think that's really important. All of us are putting content on our websites. Don't you want that 32% of customers to see it? I would hope so, because they're the ones browsing Facebook and browsing your website at 9 o'clock at night. But you can also expand that philosophy out a little bit. So talked about mobile on websites for a second. You can also talk about having a mobile first philosophy inside your building. How can you do that? At the least, because you know your customers are taking their smartphones into your building, right? Anybody ever seen somebody sitting on the floor plugged in, you know, charging up? Mobile first philosophy would be putting a comfy chair there, right? Or a table or a charging station, that kind of thing. So have some power cables in a box. Have some charging stations that customers can check out or use in the building. Simple things like, you know, some of our catalogs now or discovery layers will do text messaging instead of having to write down the call number, that kind of thing. Put signs up in the building. We have awesome Wi-Fi. That means you have to get awesome Wi-Fi first. But so Harris would not have that. Just saying. How about mobile first in the community? Put up a sign, you know, 10 blocks away saying Wi-Fi in 10 blocks, check out the library. Use one of Jason Griffey's library boxes at the farmer's market on Saturday morning and give out free content. That's the type of mobile stuff, right? Or get a Wi-Fi hotspot, share out that kind of thing. And then mobile for staff. Anybody use your mobile device for work? Your personal one? And does your library pay for it? No. Everybody's hands go down. A few of them aren't. Something you should talk about, right? You know, in the 90s, of course the library paid for the phone on my desk. Duh. In this century, why aren't they subsidizing this thing? Maybe they should, because I'm checking emails at 9 o'clock at night. But also have a good dedicated Wi-Fi connection for your staff that's not the public side of things, beef it up, etc. So I think let's start working on that kind of thing now. I think it's really important. So that's my trend. Now I think it's your turn.
I do believe it is my turn. All right. So my trend, as reported to the fine people who set this up, was open hardware. And I decided that in order to get to open hardware, I needed to talk a little bit about hardware in general. I think most libraries are fairly comfortable talking about software at this point, especially like open source software. Lots of libraries use some variety of open source software in their daily kind of, you know, endeavors, whether that's WordPress or Drupal or, you know, something that runs the connectors on their website. So there's lots of open source things out there that libraries are using, but we're not as familiar with open hardware. And I wanted to just set a stage as to why I think that's actually something that we should be paying attention to. Hardware is something that is very, very predictable in its growth, in how it gets better. There are two laws, actually, and they're pretty much been true for years and years about the engineering of computers, of computer hardware, and those are Moore's law and Kumi's law. Moore's law says that every 18 months, what a chip can do, the amount of processes that a computer chip can handle doubles every 18 months. So every 18 months, your chips get twice as fast, right? And Kumi's law said, and at the same time they get twice as fast, they get half as expensive to manufacture. So you get every 18 months a doubling of speed and a halving of price, like clockwork, and that's been true since the 70s, since the 60s. The other law is Kumi's law, and that says that at a fixed computing load, when a chip is doing something, the amount of energy you need to do that halves every 18 months. Those are both completely steady laws of their basic engineering laws that anyone who does computer design understands and knows. But it isn't always kind of tangible because we're not living in 18-month chunks. We're living day to day, and we're seeing the new cell phone get released every week, right? And it's marginally better than the one we have in our hand, but it's not remarkably better than the one we have in our hand. And so in 2 years, we'll upgrade and it'll be a lot better. But we don't kind of see this longitudinal growth of the hardware over time. And it's a common kind of thing when you're talking about hardware to say things like, so the phone that I'm holding, right, has more processing power in it than all of the computers in the world when we went to the moon, right? That's true. What we don't often think about is that that also means that in 20 years, the thing that I'm holding in my hand, whether it's shaped like a phone or not, or whether it's implanted in my arm, whatever that thing is that I am dealing with, is going to be more powerful than all of the computers that are on the planet right now, right? So if you think about the things that are going on with Deep Blue and Watson and some of the massive supercomputers on the planet, the thing that you can afford and hold will be more powerful than all of those put together in 20 years. Okay? That's what Moore's law and Kumi's law mean. It also means that because it gets more and more and more powerful, the average kind of baseline of technology, the cost of it for hardware goes down and down and down. Personal computing hardware, gadgets, it's the only consumer good that gets cheaper and better over time. Every other consumer good gets cheaper and worse or better and more expensive. But electronics, all the time, forever and ever, will get cheaper and better, okay? So when you kind of wrap all of those things up, you get a ubiquity of amazing hardware that is going to overwhelm us. The sensors that these things contain are getting smaller and smaller and cheaper and cheaper. I'm wearing one on my wrist, right? This is a pedometer, a digital pedometer. How many people in here are wearing a Fitbit, measuring their steps around, right? So little digital pedometers. These things would have been, you couldn't have afforded one 10 years ago to do what this thing does. And now it's incredibly cheap. And it's measuring everything I do. It's measuring where I walk around. It's measuring how I sleep at night. It's measuring all sorts of things. The growth of this sort of hardware and the proprietary nature of it, right? So those of you with Fitbits, you connect to the Fitbit website and it updates your Fitbit information. You can share that data a little bit, but you don't have control over that data in the way that you might if the hardware platform that you were dealing with was completely open. It took us decades to realize that the benefit of open software was that we could control it, right? And I think that there is some degree to which over the next several years we are going to start deciding that at least at some level open hardware is going to give us the ability to control certain aspects of the computing experience we put in front of people that we may not now quite realize. Primary among those is the amount of data that leaks in a privacy sense from the hardware that we use and from the hardware that our customers, patrons are using. Some of you have probably seen the news about the latest Facebook emotion experiment data. Facebook, this was just a paper was just released, if you haven't seen the story, that Facebook basically decided to screw with their customers and manipulate their news feeds in order to give their news feeds either positively emotionally charged stories or negatively emotionally charged stories. So they manipulated the feeds you were reading, all of you out there, and then they tracked how you updated your own feed and whether you updated your own feed positively or negatively using semantic analysis of the posts, right? And what they discovered was, no big surprise, if you feed people bad news, they will report more bad news and feel bad about it. And if you report good news, then people will feel good and report more good things, right? There's kind of a social, emotional thing going on there. Well, the more data we leak and the more the hardware we have is closed to us to understand what the data is that we're leaking, the more that sort of slightly creepy use of our data I think is going to kind of rise to the surface. So the privacy thing underlies it, but I think that open hardware is going to be something that we're going to need to take a look at over the next 5 years or so.
Thank you. I have a question for David, but if any of you have questions for either David or Jason, maybe you can wander to the mic or tweet them. And my question for David about mobile first and cell phones and smartphones is, you know, it seems to me that we're going to have to really enforce work-life balance if that becomes the case. Or do you have some thoughts on that? And I think that's a good thing. But
You're right. That's what my HR director would say.
yeah.
Well, and honestly, we have some staff, like I'm salaried, so I can work all the time and
Yeah.
it's okay.
Yeah.
Not really.
Well,
But we have some hourly employees, and if they go over 40 hours a week, that's not a good thing unless we've approved it in triplicate or whatever. And if they're checking their email at night, in reality, they're actually working overtime. We don't count it that way, but probably should.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a huge issue. Want the work-life balance thing, of course.
Yeah.
Not sure how to figure that out quite yet. You know, how do you tell somebody, no, you can't check your email at night? But you can say that, but they won't necessarily do it because some of those employees are, you know, like some of us, they love their job.
Right.
I want to work on that tonight.
Right. Yeah.
So it's hard to do.
Yeah. Any other thoughts from the panelists, Boyan?
So I wanted to mention a couple of trends that might be related to what David mentioned. So what David mentioned is mobile first. So it used to be more focused on how to make library websites and other web applications that we have mobile friendly. And now it's like becoming more like analog space as well. But like one thing that I wanted to point out is that a lot of us focused on mobile first library websites. So responsive web design was a big thing, and we wanted to make that possible for library websites and applications. And a lot of times what we did was we found some sort of web framework like Bootstrap that would help us to convert our library websites into responsive. And one thing that you need to remember, and this is actually not so much my idea, but actually a blog post coming up in ACR Tech Connect will be written by Michael Schofield. And he mentions that, well, it's great to use a framework like Bootstrap, but they're actually heavy. So when you are turning your website mobile friendly and responsive, actually you might be making the mobile latency problem severe. That means that when you load your mobile website, actually it's going to take forever because it might be just as heavy as your normal site. So the fact that it is responsive doesn't mean that it's going to be mobile-wise user-friendly, right? So one of the things that Michael recommends is that when you use Bootstrap, for example, you can customize it so that you can only have the parts that are going to be used by your website. So that's one way to do it. So when you make your library website mobile friendly, I think that's a really great advice, that you should make sure that that is lightweight. So that's one of the really important part of mobile applications.
So I got a question from the audience. So whoever, I don't know where he is, but John Bleiberg said, asked me if I could talk about the coming war on general computing. And I mean, I think that, you know, what he means is, of course, that the rise of the platform-based computing technologies, iOS, Android, that are heavily controlled by their masters, right? They're not, you can't do anything you want to on them without jailbreaking them or otherwise hacking them to be general purpose computers, and the decline in market share of the general purpose computer clearly shows us that, I mean, customers have a preference, right? General consumers are voting with their dollars that they don't use general computing. I don't know that that means it's going to go away, and one of the reasons I don't think it's going to go away as a platform is exactly the thing that I just talked about: open hardware combined with open software, right? When the plans for building your own laptop, there's an open source laptop currently being designed and built by the most famous, probably the most well-known hardware hacker in the world, Bunny Huang, Andrew Huang, who is famous in the kind of hardware hacking world. He got $700,000 from over 1,000 people on a crowdfunding site to build a general purpose, open source, complete with open schematics and everything, laptop. And then you have open source hardware or software you can run on top of that. So the falling price of the hardware, the general openness of it, and the ability for anyone to replicate it combined with the open source software means I don't think that general computing is going anywhere. I do think that it is likely that consumers are not going to choose it unless they have a reason to choose it, though. So
Jason, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Thinking with my public librarian hat on.
Yes.
So I'm buying 90 computers this fall to put out into the public.
Sure.
I'm so not thinking about that. But what should we be concerned with? Buying servers, buying software, buying computers in the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it does depend on, you have to have your, what is the priority, right? Like, the priority for serving your patrons is putting things in them that are familiar, that they can use, that they don't have to be trained how to use, that they're comfortable with, all of those things, right? And in most cases, that still, for some bizarre reason that I don't quite understand, means Windows computers, right? For goodness, that company. So, you're still putting, whatever, Windows 8 at this point, I guess, in front of them. But the knowledge that, as a general purpose computer, generally speaking, Windows 8 and the kind of desktop form factor that we're still mostly dealing with in libraries isn't doing things, they're not doing this, they're doing some of the same things, but they're doing all of the same things that something like a mobile phone is, where it knows where I am at all times and is reporting back to the servers how I'm moving around, and the kind of privacy concerns that come with the use of a general purpose computer is not quite as high. But with that said, I do think that public libraries especially should be looking at things like setting up their own Tor node and running your traffic through Tor. Anonymize the traffic as it goes out over the wire. Why give your, I don't know who provides your, do you have Google coming in your library at this point? No, okay, well, whatever. You wish you did. But whoever your provider is, right? Like one of the things that nobody talks about is the fact that whoever is providing us internet can read everything we do, right? Like whoever you're getting your internet from knows all of the things your patrons are doing, right? And that's probably not a good thing. So if you're worried about that sort of privacy issue, set up a Tor node, make yourself a Tor exit, set up everything to go through that, and anonymize everything coming in and out of the building.
I just want to suggest maybe another option when it comes to looking at computing, what computer to buy. And I think part of it is how it's shaped in your day. Mm-hmm. So generally we have a mobile device when we're commuting, if we're on the subway or on a streetcar or whatever. You sit in front of a desktop computer or a laptop with a keyboard because you have to write emails. That's very important. And then you go home and you're tired of typing emails, and so you sit down in front of a tablet or maybe your mobile device, and you sit back on a sofa and you relax with with one screen or two screens. So what I think of laptops are is, it's funny, I was looking for a new laptop, and I was looking, and one brand said it's the laptops are for people who do things. So I almost think like we talk about long form reads.
That's great.
And it's almost like the laptop is for the long form device where you have to spend a lot of time. If you're editing video, you're probably going to use it on a sizable machine. Mm-hmm. And so it's a sort of creative versus consuming. So I guess in a library setting, you have to think, is this a place where you want people to sit down and read a while? Is this a place where you want people to sit and write something? Those sort of hardware constraints really have to come out of what people need and what we can provide. That's what I would think as well. Something to keep up.
One last thing on hardware and privacy, because Frank just called me out for my hatred of Windows and love of Apple. Thanks, Frank. So I will say there are many reasons that I like Apple very much, but one of them is that they are actively making privacy an issue in the marketplace, especially with their with iOS. The newest version of iOS that's coming in the fall, iOS 8, has hundreds of changes underneath that make it very, very, very sensitive to the information that's inside your phone and doesn't share it with the apps that you load and everything in the same way that Android does. So one of the things that I like about them, among others, is that they are actively making privacy a conversation that we have to have. So.
And I wanted to add one trend. So like if you have listened to what Jason said about open hardware, you can kind of imagine that this trend will maybe perhaps move towards people making more simple hardwares using a lot of sensors. So you would have heard about Internet of Things. So that would be one trend that would be related to open hardware. But another trend that I wanted to point out was that this will be also related to another trend called the quantified self. So if you have read the Horizon report this year, that was one of the upcoming trends. And what that means is that we are going to be measuring a lot of things about ourselves. So it's called big data, but particularly this is going to be focused on ourselves. So what do I do actually when I have a lot of time? Do I spend 90% of my work time actually on research, or actually I'm spending 90% to surfing internet and then 10% on actually writing, right? So there will be much more self-knowledge coming from perhaps open hardware and maker movement. And when that happens, it's going to become too much data about ourselves than what we can process. So what would be the consequence of that? And what would be the consequence of that in relation to the library? So that's also something to think about when you think about open hardware, how it has impact on other things that we are interested in.
Great. Well, while you're speaking, Boyoung, do you want to talk about your other trend?
Sure. So I can. So the trend that I have is called the biohacker space and the do-it-yourself biology movement. So how many of you have heard about makerspace? Okay, so almost every one of you. So now how many of you have heard about biohacker space? Okay, so only some of you. So this is a really good sign. So biohacker space basically is a community laboratory in which the public is welcome to come and learn and do tinker with microorganisms such as, and its building blocks, so such as like DNA, genes, bacteria, whatever have you. So that sounds like really complicated, but actually this movement is called do-it-yourself biology. It started around 2005, and out of that, biohacker space came to be. So the first biohacker space in the States has opened, I think, in December 2010. It was in Brooklyn, New York, and it is called the Gen Space, and it was founded by molecular biologist Ellen Jorgensen at Medical College of New York. And her vision was that everybody who wants to do science should be able to do it without having some sort of affiliation with the big institutions, right? So a while ago, before we had Makerspace, we were not able to manufacture things like the way that we want to unless we had access to certain hardware. And Makerspace made it possible. It democratized the manufacturing. And the same thing is now happening in biohacker space, that actually biology is being democratized. So you can think of biohacker space as the biological version of makerspace. So at makerspace, people come to make things. They want to tinker with things. They want to repurpose things that they have. They want to come up with some kind of low-cost version of what you buy commercially. And in order to do that, they make use of the equipment that you usually don't have in your living room, right? Laser cutter, CNC milling machine, 3D printer. Biohacker space It's the same thing. So if you have a biotechnology project and you don't have any lab to go, this is where you can go. You go to biohacker space, and the space offers you like things like microscope, pipette, agar petri dish, and then some of the hardware like PCR machine, which actually replicates DNA. And what is really interesting is that some of biohackers actually also worked on open hardware. So the commercial PCR machine costs about $6,000. And it's a very common thing if you're doing anything genomics, you need this machine. Now, biohackers actually came up with an idea to build this, but the open source version. And they succeeded in Denmark, and you can buy it now for $600. And also you can get the blueprint online for free. So this is the kind of things that are happening, and now biology is getting applied to maker space movement. So what is really interesting about biohacker space is that biology is now transforming itself from pure science to technology. So since the discovery of DNA 60 years ago, modern biology made the progress by leaps and bounds. And now molecular biologists, synthetic biologists, they are saying to us is that biology is in the stage in which it is becoming just technology. You don't have to understand it at a very fundamental level, but it is at a stage in which you can use it for technical purposes to solve the problems that you are interested in. So you think that like, what would I do with biotechnology? I haven't been at biology lab since I graduated from middle school or something. I don't barely remember how to use microscope. And you'd be surprised to see what they are doing at biohacker spaces. So there are currently like 6 or 7 in the States, and we have one in Baltimore where I live. And the project that people are pursuing here is just amazing. So some of the things are trivial and rather silly. So you can get bioluminescent gene out of, a certain organism that has this gene, and you can extract it, and then you can inject it into bacteria, and then now you have a bacteria that glows in the dark. That's very cool, right? But it doesn't seem to have that much practical purpose. Now, Meredith Patterson, who is a big do-it-yourself biology advocate, she actually used this technology into yogurt, and what she accomplished is that this yogurt will glow in the dark, but if it senses a certain toxin in the milk. So we all know about the hazard of certain milk made in China, and that it can really pose a severe risk to babies. Now, there's a practical problem that big pharma, big bio, big institutional sciences are not really interested in solving. And some of these biohackers are actually addressing that. If you have a neighbor who doesn't pick up their dog food, and you're really upset about dog poop, sorry about that, and you want to find out which dog is actually doing that, some of these people went to the dog park in the neighborhood, collected the saliva of all the dogs in the neighborhood, they did some gene testing, and they found out. Imagine the possibility of biohacking for investigative journalists. If you are a journalist and you need to verify something, this can be an amazing thing. So the science that is actually democratized, that is an amazing thing. Another example that I have that was really interesting was GMO. So for example, we buy expensive goat cheese. Are you really sure that that comes from goat? Now there's a way to find out. You bought caviar. You sure that's that kind of caviar that you think you're eating? So there's another way to think about that. And then there's a more significant discovery. Like some biohackers created a machine that can test whether you have malaria or not at the cost of $1 per testing. This can change the world, right? So you can see the impact that there are some trivial and very hobbyist projects, and then there are projects that actually can impact all of us. So the do-it-yourself biology advocate defines that science literacy is not just understanding science anymore. They think that science literacy is being able to do science. And they are actually providing the spaces so that actually this can happen. So this, we don't know whether this is going to stay as a rather marginal phenomenon or whether it's going to go mainstream. But think about how the trend will work with other things such as open hardware or maker movement that is already becoming mainstream. That can become an amazing things. And when citizens and the public approaches biotechnology problems, they think in a very different way than institutional scientists. So this is also a reaction to the way that currently how sciences are being practiced, right? Even institutional scientists are not happy with the way science research is being conducted right now. It's very remote. The problems seem to be really technical almost. The process is very compartmentalized. So there is not that much maybe passion anymore, and maybe that's some of the reaction that is driving this biohacker space movement. So you can see that this biohacker space and also the do-it-yourself biology movement might actually open up a plane of new creativity, new innovation, and empowerment for all of us. One of the projects that I was really impressed with was creating an ink. So there were some French biohackers, and one of the problems that came from, I think, either artist or somebody, so they met up in biohacker space, and this guy had a really interesting idea that, well, can we make some kind of like pen that actually generates ink that is biodegradable? So I don't know how many of you knows this, but ink is actually a very toxic material. And we use it a lot, and they created a pen that actually generates pigment out of the bacteria that actually plays the role of the pen. So you can see how this movement can affect us. So that's my trend.
Any thoughts? Mita? You have-
I was just going to say, one of the things I like to pay attention to the book publisher O'Reilly, because they seem to have a very good understanding of what happens in technology, and they've started to publish a number of books about how to do chemistry at home and biology at home. And I was looking through it, and it looks really interesting. I think that's where I saw how you could turn your blender into a centrifuge. in case you needed to do that.
Always useful. Roger, do you want to talk about your trend?
Sure. Well, I thought that my trend was going to be the one that was going to have the most privacy implications, but I actually think that having a PCR machine in your neighborhood might be the more worrisome one. So Ken talked about discovery, principally thinking about search and how search is changing, and the way that libraries are changing the way that they're offering search for their users. But of course, discovery is about a lot more than just search. And today I'm going to try to focus on current awareness, by which I really mean how researchers are keeping up with new scholarship in their field. So I'm focusing principally on academia in terms of where I'm coming from, but I do think there may be some implications here more broadly as well. So in our survey, and I think in our survey of faculty members, we found that for current awareness, scholars rely on peer sources at least as much as any other sources. By peer sources, I mean things like colleagues' suggestions of what to read, what literature to read in their field, and going to a conference and attending a session and hearing about the newest things going on in the field. So those kinds of peer sources are just incredibly important. And in some fields, especially in the humanities, book reviews are an incredibly important discovery tool for humanists. And so libraries and publishers have been moving into current awareness, perhaps not principally, but certainly significantly through the provision of e-table of contents alerts and things like that that send out an alert to you when the new issue of a journal, let's say, comes out. But as scholars in some fields have signed up for hundreds of these kinds of journal alerts, they've told us that they're absolutely overwhelmed by them, and in some cases just ignoring them. And so there's clearly a way in which the system is fragmented. It's not at the right level of granularity, and it doesn't help much in monograph-intensive fields, or at least not as much as a sort of book review-driven mechanism has in the past. So my trend is anticipatory and contextual discovery. This means discovery that's driven by not by what I might search for, but by what I might care about, which is a really, really different paradigm. And it's also delivered when it's useful to me, and not just when it's new. And that's also an incredibly interesting paradigm. So I think maybe one of the kind of flagship or the services that has gotten the most attention here is Google's Now product, which I'm sure at least some of you have some familiarity with. Just in the last week, I've gotten alerts for restaurants I might like to make reservations at in Las Vegas a week before I was going to Las Vegas. I've gotten alerts while I was at the Bronx Zoo about websites that I might want to visit while I'm at the Bronx Zoo. That one wasn't very helpful. I really wanted to look at the animals, but and just on on Wednesday, I got an alert for what time of morning I should leave the next day to get to the airport using public transport, which is my preferred mechanism, which immediately told me that I was taking a taxi. So, so it was actually like some of these alerts are more helpful than others, certainly, but you can see a different kind of framework for how current awareness or the things that you might care about today is being generated. Some of you might be familiar with Google Scholar product and the tool that they've added inside of Scholar that I think is interesting in this space. They call it something like My Updates or Updates. And so this is actually based on my own publications. So you have to kind of register what you've written with the service. There aren't currently other kinds of signals that it tracks on as far as I can see, but it provides outstanding recommendations. And when I go to Google Scholar, which I don't do all the time, and when I look at the updates that it offers me, it's like if I could project it here, you would, and if you knew anything about my interests, you would be absolutely. I'm just so impressed with the quality of what it can deliver to me. Now, I don't go to it that often because I have to go there, and it's not really integrated into a workflow that works right for me. So, maybe emails or some other alerting mechanism is really what's needed, and there's all sorts of reasons why maybe Google Scholar isn't quite the right vehicle for offering this, or maybe it is. But I guess what I'm trying to suggest is that if we could think about what is already being developed in anticipatory and contextual search, and think about how that could, or anticipatory and contextual discovery, and think about how that might be applied in terms of the kinds of current awareness services that library users want and need, I think we could come up with some really interesting service models. There's certainly a privacy trade-offs to track back to what I foreshadowed a minute ago. And certainly as more signals are tracked, I think we all know as more signals are tracked, we get better recommendations, or at least that might be a strong hypothesis. But there's privacy implications there for sure. But so anyway, the question that I want to kind of close with to raise is whether libraries, perhaps collaboratively, perhaps working with vendors, perhaps individually, whether they should be engaging more deeply with helping users keep up with the literature in their fields. And this could be, the research literature is what I'm kind of focused on and thinking about in my own professional context, but I think we're seeing a lot of interesting efforts coming up to think about how, in a public library setting, let's say, how a reader figures out which novel they might wish to read next. And I think similar kinds of paradigms would make sense in both of those cases, though perhaps with different signals and different indices and so forth. To come back to the kind of scholarly research literature, there could be social components to this. There's certainly, you might think about the idea of bringing the kinds of current awareness that takes place in a conference, how if at all, that could be integrated into a contextual awareness service. You might think about how book reviews actually could be much more integrated and useful if they weren't, with certain kinds of developments. And I think, the anticipatory and contextual methods that I find so interesting are just one piece of all of this. I think an environmental scan of what's going on in information discovery suggests that current awareness is a real fertile ground for libraries to be thinking more about their role in right now. Thanks.
Wondering, Ken, if you have any thoughts about how current awareness tools fit into discovery systems?
Well, I
sort
think
of
there's
broad scale.
Yeah, there's obviously a great deal of overlap. I mean, Google is nothing but a honking big discovery system, and they have wonderful algorithms to do that mapping and matching, and they're out. I don't think anybody does text classification and that kind of thing better than they do. I think that the bodies of information that libraries have access to we often license we don't own. We don't have the power. Even if we had the computing power, we don't have access to all of that text, let alone all the user information that Google in its omnipotence gets to play with. Yeah. I do think that there's a great opportunity here for libraries because we do understand our patrons, certainly at the abstract level, of what an undergraduate in this looks like or a graduate in that looks like. And there are systems that I think could pretty easily be built to take advantage of some of the knowledge we have of usage patterns of information, as well as flows of new stuff. So I think it's an exciting place to be thinking about that kind of anticipatory information delivery.
Mita?
Yeah, I tend to use like Twitter as my recommendations. What I try to do is I try to follow the people who are much smarter than I am and are much better readers. And when something really grabs their attention, I tend to bookmark it. And so I think this idea of sort of streams of recommendations from a trusted network, I think people who use Goodreads, that's the same sort of thing. We tend to place value on our friends' reading choices as opposed to, maybe even more so than, the New York Times sometimes. And I think there are possibilities, as Ken mentioned, about we do have some information. One of the things that we could, use to make our collections better, one example that comes to mind is that, every year in, colleges and universities, faculty create reading lists. And this is essentially what they're recommending. They're building courses on these reading lists, and it really grieves me because these are essentially the highest recommendations, and then we tend to throw them away. So just what you were saying, if we had a corpus of citations where it's like, if you like these citations, you'll love these citations. We have that corpus, and maybe, I don't know about that second step, but just collecting that information and finding a way to share it amongst institutions, I think would be a really interesting first step.
Actually, I'll say we already have some of that data in our ILS systems. Mm-hmm. We're just choosing not to use it or choosing to delete it because we're freaked out with privacy. But if we were Amazon, we would totally say, oh, David tends to check out fantasy novels with elves and swords. So if we get a new book in the library, let's send him a text message or email. Why aren't we doing more of that with our data that we already have? Because we have a ton of it.
I think one of the things that is interesting in thinking about where this might develop and how this might develop is that at least in an academic context, the folks who have the big indices are the ones who are actually best positioned to offer these kinds of services. And I think we've seen a lot of reluctance to, a lot of privacy concerns and not wanting to gather data and and et cetera. And I think those are certainly reasonable questions to ask. But I think we're also at a point where there could really be some services that users would want so badly that what the library cares about may or may not actually be the limiting factor. And I think there's an interesting set of roles to think through if in fact that broader environment is driving needs more so than a set of values that we may have. So yeah.
And even beyond the ILS, certainly in an academic setting or even public library settings where users authenticate to gain access to resources, you at least have a good record that you could use either at an individual level or anonymized or kind of broadened out to a class of users. Yeah. Keeping in mind that use does not mean it was useful or valuable, but at least you have a universe of things that that person touched. And maybe they turned it down and found something else, but that's a lot less than everything.
Great. So Ranti, it's your turn.
My trend is I think many, especially academic library, already look into that. And I talked about the data management, but I also would like to expand that to become digital assets management, because we collect many libraries academic libraries start collecting data, research data, or approach the faculty on advising how to manage their research data. And then several universities already try to build infrastructure to probably collect those data, develop collection development policies, and then try to make it like probably open, hopefully for other researchers to look at. There's already some kind of data management tools out there, things like the MP tool for the planning, and then we have Dryads or Figshare or any places like that. But then the idea is also, since the library, can the library become the repository for those data that the faculty produce themselves? And then it's become part of our digital assets offering to back to the faculty, researchers, students, and everybody else. And to me, digital asset is more than just data. So some libraries also collecting the thesis and dissertation. So then if the PhD student have that thesis, they also have data, then maybe we should collect them both and then connect them, create a great metadata, make it available for others to cite those data. The problem right now is actually we don't really know how to approach that, because probably so many restriction might happen. Is we talk about privacy issues because we talk about identifiable information from those data. So we still have to sanitize those data, but we also make sure that certain things might come back to identify again those persons if needed. It's a big flag privacy issue there, but then certain things might need, information might still need it in order to continue those research. So it's just very more, from my perspective, more really about the collections and providing that back to the universities. Let's see what else. And then, so the one that I was thinking is back to Ken talk about, because many libraries already built our digital collections. That's, to me, it's also part of their digital assets. But it's still in terms of a siloed, because we create a database of certain project and we create another database for different projects. Can we then create another one, sort of like almost like discovery layer for those digital collections that we have? But then tie back to Roger's idea, make it a useful and context sensitive. So we have a lot of happenings, and we can connect that probably to those collections that being gathered by other institutions outside the university. I was thinking about probably Natural Science Museum. They have a lot of researchers and have also a lot of data happening there. I'm talking also about the historical society in the community. They also collect some kind of information from the community, more like family heirlooms and digital collection. Maybe they might digitize that. And then we can create some kind of connection between those information and make it more useful for anybody, especially those interested in an interdisciplinary research area. I think that's it.
Great. Any comments from the panel? Lita?
I was just curious, one of the things I was wondering was whether libraries had a role in like data visualization, because collecting logs, like massive tables and tables and tables of data, unless if you're trying to browse data and you want to know whether it's meaningful or not, you'd at least like to have some sort of a visualization to kind of have a quick assessment of whether it's useful and whether you think libraries could have a role in that.
Sure thing. I mean, library that's not the only one who have that role, because definitely a lot of researchers who likes to do tinkering with that too. But a library purpose can also become the producing that visualization in order to make people understand what's kind of information we have. But also we can have a role in teaching that information, like that one server setup, install stuff, basically, right? And we can teach them how to do that, and we can teach them this is how you're going to use the tool in order to produce your own visualization. Because everybody has their own need of data in a produce a visualization. The library creates something, but then you might have something else in mind, because your the one that you need to know is not necessarily the same as the one that we produce. So, but then understanding that how to make that happen is probably one of the library strengths that we can leverage in order to teach people how to use it.
Great. Questions from the audience? We have about 15 minutes. Got a brave soul coming up.
Hello. Okay. Do you hear me? Yes. Well, I'm Santiago from Colombia. I'm here for the first time. It was a long trip, but I'm learning a lot. Thank you. I'm learning a lot, and I'm here showing our experience in public libraries and digital culture. We have a very little public library that is making social and collaborative mapping. That's why I'm wearing a map. I was today showing the poster, and they are, for example, having the same problem that you guys just tell us. They don't have enough hardware, and the hardware that they have is closed. They don't have open software. We just, around 2 years ago, we won the Bill and Melinda Gates award, but that means that you have to use Windows. So it's not that good. And I want to ask you, how do you do your public library, convert the library in a hub for social networking? Because we in our social libraries, we don't have the funds that you have here. We want to make possible to do great things with very little money, I don't know. But in that way, we want to make the public library a hub for the people. How do we do that in Colombia? Thank you very much. I know it's a difficult question, but
It is. So my first thought on that is you don't necessarily need to start with the technology part of it, because making the library a hub in the community doesn't start with tech at all. It starts with friendly, open staff, a safe place where you can come and have differing opinions, different ideas, where you can come create new ideas. Do that part first, which is huge too. And then add technology to that. Okay, everybody's gathering here now. We need great Wi-Fi. Let's figure that part out. We need some of Jason's library boxes or more open computers so people can tinker and make new things. Figure that part out. So baby steps. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
we have, in fact, we have in one of our public libraries, we have a mesh Wi-Fi network that is providing Wikipedia and that maps to the people, not internet. Only that's outside the walls of the library.
Yeah. I was going to back up and talk about hardware because that's my gig right now. So if you haven't had a chance, you're talking about doing open mapping and things with hardware. If you haven't had a chance, in the exhibit hall is a hardware company called SparkFun. They're 1870. They're actually doing, there's a couple of projects that they're working on using open hardware, Arduino-driven drones to do mapping via computer vision. You should go talk to them.
Thank you very much. Of course.
I just want to add something because it's kind of interesting that you're asking. There's a really cool trend that's happening right now in my city, San Diego, California. We're doing an urban prototyping event this weekend, which I'm sadly not there. What we're doing is we're getting the community together to basically do an open city project, and what we're doing is we're basically data visualization of the city. People are coming together as a community, buying different open source hardware like the Arduino, different sensor, they're putting it together and just taking in the data. So that's how we're doing it, is just through the community and not necessarily through expensive equipment or anything like that. So
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Got a question at the back?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I run a big department, and while I'm tech aware and even tech savvy in some things, I'm not a tech creator, and I don't live in the tech world. And I have some needs for like a database evaluation software, and I find that that trends come first in programs, and then databases follow. Like I'm opening UMedia Hartford in a few weeks, and I want a software that tracks attendance and programs and activities, and that the kids can do surveys through it, you know. But I also want it, because it's homago, hanging out, messing around, and geeking out, I also want to measure if the equipment that they're using is being used by the kids hanging out, or the kids, you know, if they're getting a certification in sound production. And so I want to link the kind of the in-house inventory use to it for evaluation. Now I can hire an evaluator who could hire interns that will sit and make tallies on a piece of paper, because the software doesn't exist. And I've tried to talk to people, the companies here, and this person said, oh, I can do that for you. You use this software for the attendance, this software for this, and then you can do our room reservation software and call each piece of technology a room. And then people can book a room, and I'm like, I don't want to book a room. I want them to tell me if they're using the 3D printer. And she's like, well, but if you have them, they're booking a room. So, long question. What can you do in situations like this where the tech is not matching the innovation in services? Long question. Sorry.
Well, I mean, to some degree, it's somewhat flip, but we should build it ourselves. I mean, you may not have the capacity to do it, right? And but somewhere, some library does. We should have better tools that allow us to collaborate on that sort of stuff and then share it widely. Even as much as I am currently making a product and trying to sell it to people, I would much rather people make it themselves, because I think that's better for libraries. So find partners. Kind of easy to say and hard to do, but
That's actually what I was pretty much going to say too. Build it yourself. You could you've got a state library association, have them do actual stuff. Yeah. That's a place to start, right? Yeah. I'm being mean. Or jury rig, like the product you just talked about. It so doesn't work, but it sort of does. It could pilot. It could be a pilot project kind of thing. And then you could go back to the company and say, look, here's what we really want. Can you do this? And if there's a market for that sort of thing, they might just say yes. So that's a way to think about it too.
All right.
Mita, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I could think of is in extension of like thinking of partners is, there was one, but the first immediate thing came to mind was a lot of times you just want to sit there and like make notes while you want to be engaged with people while you're there. And it just reminded me of a story about how in the UK they have a problem with double-decker buses. You don't know until the seats are all full. And so rather than figuring out how many seats were full, they just put a camera on the top. And they put a camera in the top just to see whether it is. So the first thing I thought was just put a camera or a GoPro or something, whatever, and just film everything constantly and then count afterwards, and whether it's counting by hand or counting by this. But in terms of the collaboration, that's one of those things where like computing and coding is supposed to make you feel empowered, and then there's just so many ways. It just feels like there's so many stumbling blocks to get to that point. What I'm really curious about are all these sort of nonprofit groups where you have students who want to work on meaningful projects, whether that's a hackerspace or whether that's a school. I'm not suggesting to let's exploit student labor and let's, no, I really am not. I mean, I belong to a hackerspace where our motto is, that people can donate time, but we pay as much as we can. We always try to. Our job is to recognize good work, whether it's stipends or something to that extent. So I think that sort of project will ask your community. There may be a developer who's been working on skills and they want to work on something that's meaningful. And for me, that's what got me interested in programming, was not programming itself, but wanting to do something meaningful. And there's got to be someone in your community who would love to help. And when they find out that they've got those skills that you need, and then find out a way to, be able to donate or help out or pay in kind.
Great. Got one more question here.
We have time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. I want to go back to Roger's tech trend and specifically it applied to a public library context. I'm very much interested in how we can leverage our trusted brand in public libraries to use patron data to provide new cool services that no one has ever thought of before. And I was wondering, we seem to have a collective, our profession anyways, seems to have a collective mind block about doing this type of practice. And I wonder if we could talk about, maybe pick apart a little bit, or at least identify both the sources of that block internally to the profession, and then maybe talk about the external forces that are acting on, in such a way that prevent us from using patron data to develop services.
Public librarian?
All that in 5 minutes.
I'll say one thing. I think that's coming from just our great history of privacy concerns, which is awesome. We don't want to share what you're reading with the world necessarily unless you're good with that. And we have that data, and we want to be mindful and trustworthy of that. However, I think you can separate that. We can aggregate what we have, remove names, remove addresses, so we're not saying David likes these nasty books or whatever. But we can take that data and use it for good and for building up of the community without, there's one level of privacy we don't share. There's another level of patron data that we do want to share. We do want to use it for GIS mapping, for example. We do want to use it to buy better stuff because we can tell, 30% of our customers like this. Let's buy more. That kind of thing. So I see it sort of two different levels.
And I think that libraries license and provide products and services to their users all the time that push further along the privacy spectrum than the libraries themselves would often be willing to do with their own systems and services. And I think that's really interesting, right? Requiring the use of an Amazon account to access certain library-provided services, or the sign-ins that are available to academic users of virtually every publisher and vendor website today. And so if the library's licensees are doing these kinds of things, surely the library should be trusted more than them in a way to use the data responsibly. I would think, but maybe not.
Right. And this is that mind block that I feel that we have as a profession. We can't do it for some reason, and I'm trying to figure out why. And I do hear the history of privacy, respecting the privacy of our patrons, and
I think it's totally a mind block, and of course we can do it, as long as we don't share the stuff we're not supposed to share. And I think that's really a simple thing, personally.
Right. You guys should talk afterwards.
Thanks.
So we've got about 4 minutes. That should be enough time to give away our bottle of wine. And before we do so, I'd really like to thank the panelists. Thanks, you guys. That was great. And and our committee. I know they stood up at the beginning, so if you guys want to just wave, new and outgoing, and the audience. So thank you for coming, and without further ado, Emily, you want to read it out?
Yeah, here. I'll just go to this.
Okay.
So, purely impartial here. Purely impartial. We decided we were gonna give the bottle of wine to. I'm sorry if I'm saying this wrong. Jana, librarian. Is she here?
Has she gone?
Did she go? Oh, because she, in response to the talking about the biohacker spaces, very astutely posted some nice pictures of Godzilla. So, good. Maybe we'll try to track her down.
We will try to track her down.
I know. I'm going to be like,
Or we can drink it. Yeah. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Oh, and don't forget, coming next.
Good job. That was great.
I know, it was great.
Guys, hello. Yes. Oh, awesome. Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. Oh, cool. That is fantastic. Do you have a card? I would love to get in contact with you and if you've got pictures or anything of this setup. I'd love to kind of see what you're doing with